Let's go.
Good afternoon. My name is Jim Wilson, and I am the Executive Director of CLAGS, and I am delighted to welcome you to the Homonationalism and Pinkwashing Conference. I became ED of CLAGS in June 2011, and I had scarcely moved into my new office when I received a phone call from Sarah Shulman. Sarah invited me to dinner in the East Village, and she immediately had a dozen ideas on how to make CLAGS a vital, cutting-edge center during my tenure during ED. And I should say that's about 11 more ideas than I had. One of the things she had mentioned was a conference she and CLAGS board member Matt Brim had been kicking around, focused on homonationalism and pinkwashing. My background is in theater, so I was not very familiar with a lot of the issues. The names being bandied about for keynotes were not unfamiliar to me, though. Because I am theater, I am starstruck, and there was no way I could say no to the host of individuals who would be involved. I was warned, though, that the conversations and work would be difficult and that passions from all sides would be stoked and heated. Without exaggeration, I can state that this conference has been the most challenging, intimidating, and sometimes unsettling professional experience in my 20 years in academia. It has also been the most rewarding. The learning curve has been steep, and I cannot tell you how proud I am to welcome you to this important, groundbreaking, and yes, difficult conversations that will take place over the next few days. So thank you. Before I turn over the proceedings to our first keynote speakers, I would like to welcome you also on behalf of CLAGS. Remaining true to the original mission, CLAGS provides a platform for LGBTQ scholars, activists, students, and public intellectuals of all kinds to explore issues that affect lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer individuals. We award a host of fellowships. We have a full lineup of events this spring, and we hope that you will take a look at our glossy calendar, and please join us in the spring. If you are not already a member of CLAGS, please do so. We've lost a great deal of funding over the last year and a half, so your support is greatly appreciated. And finally, I just want to also say, please refer to your packet for restaurant and food options, and don't forget to visit the book exhibit room in C205. And, now this is language that's very unfamiliar to me, but if you want to tweet about the conference, please do so, and use our designated hashtag for the conference, HomoConf, and that's one word. And there are flyers throughout the concourse, including this information. And I just want to say a special thank you to the CLAGS board members, the staff, and the GC. President Bill Kelly has just been outstanding throughout this entire process. And now to the main event. I would like to turn this over to Sarah Shulman, who really needs no introduction, and forbade me from making one. But on a personal note, I just have to say that Sarah has been my intellectual, moral, and spiritual guide throughout. So, Sarah Shulman.
Thank you, Jim. Hello. Hello, John Grayson. How are you? This conference is exactly the way we wanted it to be. And the reason that we made no compromises is because we had amazing leadership from Jim Wilson. Thank you so much, Jim, for your integrity. A lot of people worked on this. Topside Press. And if you want to buy books, they're in that room in the corner over there, so you can get them. There was a gang of 5 that ran this conference: Yasmina Savanovich, Matt Brim, Jim Wilson, myself, and Benjamin Gillespie. And so when the Anti-Defamation League would call, or someone from the CUNY hierarchy, or some very scary gay person would write some horrible thing, We would just say, no, we refuse. It's never going to happen. When they would say, you have to have another keynote speaker from the other side, like there's two sides, we'd say, no, we refuse. It's never going to happen. And it never did. So our welcome, it's chill, it's friendly. This is an environment where many of you who in many places are the only one who has your framework can relax and make new friends and get supported in developing your ideas. And what unites us, I think, is a recognition of supremacy ideology and how it masquerades as reality, and our desire to confront and dismantle that. And this also means a certain kind of confrontation with the self. So in the spirit of the humility that I know will pervade this event, I wanted to start with one self-criticism, which is that we realize that one experience that certainly has been marginalized in our own conference is that of people who are HIV positive. There's only one paper that mentions HIV/AIDS. And I think that this is a direct consequence of the marginalization of people with HIV/AIDS by Gay Inc. And the design, whenever you see those poster boys for gay marriage, they're never HIV positive, right? Publicly. And the people with HIV/AIDS, our brothers and sisters, have been pushed to the side. So I challenge myself and all of us to not mimic that over the next 2 days of the conference. So, our two keynote speakers are world-class visionaries, and I am so honored that they are here. I'm so moved that they're here. When I came out into the lesbian world, our leaders were poets. I know there are a couple people here my age who remember those days. The leaders were like Audrey and Rich and Audre Lorde. Those were the people in the front, and whenever there would be an event, it would always start with a poem. So in that tradition, we have a wonderful artist to start today's keynotes, who I can honestly say is a great novelist. In fact, I believe he's one of the greatest writers in the English language, and we are so lucky to have him with us. He's also a person who is artistically and ethically engaged. He has enormous integrity in everything that he does. His very first novel was how I got to know his work. It's called Cool AIDS, The Art of War. And since I know that many of you are academics and you don't want to marginalize HIV and AIDS in your career studies courses, this is an excellent novel to use because it's the story of an openly gay Arab man who's HIV positive, who's understanding his experiences and how they resonate with the legacy of the civil war in Lebanon. And, many, many AIDS novels take place on Fire Island, and there's nothing wrong with that. But from the beginning, his work has challenged us and told us the truth. So please welcome Rabih Alameddine.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Sarah. I'm actually a little nervous. I'm not usually nervous when I read in front of groups, but for some reason, maybe the importance of the event or that I'm reading to academics, and I will not be mentioning Foucault. But I was asked to come here a while ago because Sarah and I were having dinner, as we usually do, and I went into one of my diatribes. And I told her that I wanted to do an It Gets Worse video. And she said, would you like to present it at a conference? Not knowing anything, I said yes. And anyway, I never made the video, but I had started writing a speech, and it was called, It Gets Better Makes My Ass Look Fat. But that got nixed. And Sarah asked me to read a story. So I apologize because it's not academic. It's about 20 minutes. I believe it's the beginning of my new novel. I'm not 100% sure. So forgive me. And with these glasses, they're bifocals. I don't know how it's going to be reading them, but we'll figure it out. And it's called The Angel of History. The beating of your heart kept me awake last night. For months after you died, I kept seeing you everywhere, hearing you, your voice, sonorous, throaty, reverberating in my ear. I wasn't crazy. I knew you were dead. I buried you after all. I mean, I burned you. Cremation was what they called it. But I kept seeing you, doing dishes in the kitchen with your back to me. I'd call your name as you stacked each plate in our plastic dish rag. But you didn't look back, and then you were gone in a flash, and I was left with nothing, not even an after image. I didn't mistake you for anybody. I never saw you in a crowd, thinking someone else was you. No, it was never like that. I would never mistake you. I saw you in the hallway, in our hallway, under the Turkish lamp we brought back from Istanbul when we were there so long ago. Remember the trouble they gave us at customs for a $20 lamp? And I kept telling you to calm down and you wouldn't. Well, you went on and on because you were angry and you were a white man and I a dark Arab. And I couldn't ruffle feathers at airports even then. Must have been 1987, before the virus began to scour us. The disease killed so much within us. While I was alive, I loved you while you were alive, and I loved you now, but I forgot for a while. Forgive me. I couldn't go on obsessing about you all the time, so you disappeared or hid deep in my lakes, as if I bleached my memory. But you came back, you know, like a fungal infection. Remember thrush, the furry white stains that attacked your tongue, and we couldn't get rid of them, and you hated it, and I hated it, and you wanted it over. You'd been gone for decades. Why now? Why infect my dreams now? What flood was this? 2 days ago, I was buying groceries when a young third worlder mopped the floor. Back and forth, around a yellow sign that announced piso mojado. The mephitic aroma of disinfectant assaulted my senses, and you jumped the levee of my memory. I thought of you right then. Proust might have his Madeleine, but bleach was all ours, my darling, all ours. The tomatoes didn't look too good, and I just went home. I'd been a coward. I was scared. Do you notice I said scared and not frightened? You taught me the difference. You said, children get scared. Men might feel afraid, might even feel terror, but men don't get scared. I'd been so lonely since you died. And left me. You left me roofless in a downpour. You gripped the bed rail when you left, and I had to pry your fingers one by one to free you. It took 57 minutes because my hands were shaking so much. Did you know that? You sincerely believed that the distance between you and me would one day disappear. You told me I was not my father, and you were not him either, but how could we not be? How could we not be? The stones over his grave still felt so heavy. You held out your arms and said, join me, but I couldn't. And you said, let me love you, and I couldn't because you wanted to be so close. And you held out the fireman's net and said, jump, and I couldn't. I felt the fall was much too great. I chose to go back into the fire. You said, I like it when you doze on my chest, but I said, the hair on your chest irritates my cheeks and makes it difficult to sleep. I could hardly bear the beauty of you. You were gone for so long, and I moved along, and everyone told me I was alive, but that night, in my bed, each time my ear touched a single pillow, I heard your heartbeat once more, once more, once more. My heart is restless until it rests in thee. But then, last night, I was so angry, not like ever before. I went crazy. Sorry, it gets a little touchy. You should have seen me. I lost it in a crowded restaurant, aggressively trendy, of course. One of many that were popping up like noxious mushrooms in what used to be our old haunts. This one was sparkly new, but meant to look old. The walls, everything, had an unnatural tinge of gray, which was supposed to be the faded trace of some earlier lost color. My sanity deserted me. All I had left was rage, long-lost rage. I yelled and tantrumed, and when the tide receded, I thought of you. I miss you. Of all things, the catalyst was Didion, our sweetheart. Remember her? How could you not? Slouching toward Bethlehem was how we met. I became mortal when I met you. You stood before one of the shelves of the gay bookstore at Castro Street with her book in your hands, the light from the picture window on your left fragmenting on your face. Chiaroscuro meets Cubism, Caravaggio come Picasso. You were squinting to read the back matter. You always took your glasses off while cruising those days, remember? I was the one who convinced you how sexy smart is. Fuck me with your glasses on. Look at me when you're inside me. Look at me. Cruising in bookstores, that dates us. Bookstores have practically all disappeared now. You can't find a book or a boyfriend in a non-digital world these days. Or 28-inch waist jeans, for that matter. I stood next to you, as close as I could get, shoulders almost touching, hips almost conjoining. On your face sprang a line of a smile that didn't wish to appear too eager. It's not a gay book, I said, in a voice just above a whisper. Wanting to keep my options open in case you rejected me. I wasn't speaking to you. No, truly, I wasn't. Fox-like, your eyes glittered and darted, expressed false surprise. Yes, even then, I knew you were mocking me. How many weeks later, how many fucks did you wait before finally admitting that you used Didion's book because you thought I was just the kind of boy who might be a devotee? You joked that the book was about aging Jewish gay lads heading to the old city of Bethlehem. Then you mentioned something about an original, and I couldn't decipher because my dick was so hard. I wondered whether you were talking about the Second Coming. Your broad nose twitched, your face lit up. Yes, we were a pair, a readerly pair. Oh, I'm gonna make you come a second and a third and probably a fourth time, you said, and dragged me home. I have to tell you, that's a horrid come-hither line. Just horrid. But it worked. And now Joan Didion is writing memoirs for Oprah. First, a memoir about the death of her husband, followed by one about the death of her daughter. It didn't bother me at first. I mean, we're all getting old and sentimental. Nostalgia overwhelms our defenses, floats over our moats, and scales our walls. She's not the writer she was when younger, but few are. Don't allow your prose to reach 40 should be the motto of every writer. Commit Mishima. I shouldn't have lost it, but the music was thumping loudly, and it wasn't disco, and the restaurant was pretentious, like everything in this trippy city that brims with self-congratulation, and the waitstaff was obnoxious, and the customers more so, and I fucking hate San Francisco. Oh, I live in the city by the bay, so I must be so cool. I live in a cretinous provincial dump surrounded by pretentious, superficially amicable cretins, so aren't I wonderful? As the Maître de Malke led me into the bowels of the establishment, I felt a tug at my hand. A diner held my wrist, trying to slow me down as I passed. Didn't notice at first, and my shoulder was almost dislocated out of its customary socket. I was stopped by two young gay writers. Two rude writers, both remaining seated in the deafening cacophony. A Tom something and a something Bernard is all I can remember of their names. Two artistes of the Nouveau Bland movement. Two artistes of the Nouveau Bland movement whose manifesto consists of defending the right of gay white boys to have dating anxieties and live homo happily ever after. Tom something, with his pink, studiedly pleasant face, asked how I was doing, and without waiting for a reply, proceeded to inform me that he had fulfilled his lifelong dream of visiting Burning Man. But no, he wasn't burned at the stake. And he had problems with ubiquitous sand in his underwear, so he dispensed with bottom clothing altogether on the second day, and he transformed into one of the men without pants. I was first confused, then bored, then irritated. And he must have noticed, since he abruptly segued into the fact that he had also recently fulfilled his more important lifelong ambition of being interviewed by Terry Gross. His voice was coloratura irritating, yakety, 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 and I couldn't understand why he was talking to me, let alone regaling me with such trivia. He was gleefully enjoying his rather small turn as one of those writers who accidentally happened to get acknowledged during the short literary cycle. If all that wasn't upsetting enough, his stablemate, something Bernard, had a tickle in his throat that needed clearing every 1.5 seconds, and unless everyone's attention was directed toward him, the phlegmy, warbling frog sound grew louder and louder. He relaxed somewhat when he saw my eyes slide across the table toward the book that he was unconsciously yet reverently caressing. His nostrils flared, his face lit up, his dyed blonde hair seemed to turn 2 shades lighter, sprouting more frosted tips with each ticking moment. He interrupted his pretty friend's burning gross monologue and informed me that this was Didion's book, except he called her the goddess. His gay eyes rose toward the ceiling in Pierre Egile devotion. I could imagine a halo or at least a tiara above his head. He never missed reading any of her books, he said. I admit that I was surprised by both the insipidity of the pair and their assumed intimacy. Mediocrity is the new black, as Penny Arcade said. I wished them gone. I wished me gone. Get thee gone, get thee to a nunnery. Why wouldst thou be a breeder of sinners? I was about to walk away, my habitual leave-taking. Ever since I turned 50, I have been able to extricate myself easily and painlessly from such situations, for none of these unripe boys care for much beyond their groins or their navels. But I wasn't so lucky this time. The other young one, noticing that they're about to lose their audience, piped in, "Can you imagine? She lost her husband, and within 1.5 years lost her daughter as well. How horrifying is that?" Can you imagine? And my eyes suddenly burned hot in their sockets, and my brain boiled in my skull, and alarm bells woke me from a 20-year nap. It was instantaneous. I promise you. Zeus launched crackling thunderbolts and Molotov cocktails in Rip Van Winkle's head. I wasn't thinking, I didn't prepare, I didn't even have time to react before reacting, if you know what I mean. I most certainly didn't count to 10. I began yelling. Her husband died? You think that's horrifying? That? I had 7 friends die in a 6-month period, my partner and a dozen of my close friends in 6 months. You fucking feel sorry for her? She lived a full life. We were nothing but babies. Where was she when we were dying? Where were you, you motherfuckers? Adrenaline rushed through my veins, anarchic, atavistic, delicious. A sheen of sweat on my palms, tingles on my forearms, rage in my voice. Even as I was yelling, as I was abandoning any sense of decorum, I realized that the question I was asking was silly. I mean, where were they? They were barely in middle school then, probably 8 or 10. Same as Yahweh asking Job, where wast thou when I laid the foundation of the earth? I wasn't even born then, you silly thing. No one was. And facing me, still seated, the boys, soft-shelled and scared, looked like they were truly 8 or 10. At first, frosted tips squeezed the memoir and then let go as my barrage intensified. He reached for his ice-filled glass, probably thinking I was going to spill it on him. Tom Something's knuckles were mottled white as he clutched the sides of the table. I wanted to feel sorry, but I couldn't. I just couldn't stop, could not. I was in the midst of an amygdala hijacking, a carjacking. Get the hell out of your car because I feel the need for speed. How can you not know your history? I yelled over and over. You, with your righteous apathy, how can you allow the world to forget us, to delete our existence, the grand illusion of queer history? The thump-thump of the music remained loud, but every other noise had faded. AIDS killed the best of us, and everyone heard me say it. AIDS killed all of us. I watched morning stars dim and die, saw morning stares directed at covens and urns. I could feel every eye on me, every nervous and baleful glower. When I was in 4th grade, I used to stand outside the yard during recess, wondering if my classmates would jump me once the teachers or monitors turned away. Same thing in that restaurant. The fear of being jumped, seared inside me, inside my own skin, never went away, my love, never did. 3rd-degree burns right under the surface. Moonlight easily bruised it. I covered myself with layers and layers, with false fronts and bitchy attitude, but my scarred and charred history refused entombment. I felt dirty, congenitally filthy. Who could wash me clean as snow? Nothing but the blood of Jesus. Give it to me, I'll drink, fuck me. I can walk into any room and tell you in the blink of an eye where the danger lies. Who hates me, who despises me, it's a superpower, I tell you. X-Men have nothing on me. Frosted Tips was pee in his pants scared, looked at me as if I was carrying an AK-47. I wish. They all saw me that way. A faggot Arab terrorist, so I should get an AK-47. Again, I wanted to feel sorry for him, but then I yelled, all AIDS books are out of print because of you, because you only read books sanctioned by the petite NPRZ and their indiscreet charm. Your fault, your grievous fault. We refused everything. We rejected their heavens and their hells, and you turn around and accept both. You keep saying, I do, and I do, and I do, and fuck me more, daddy, while they shove you into a tiny vestibule, and you pretend it's Versailles. Kitchen doors swung open, and a trio of chewful waiters walked behind me, oblivious to my Jeremiad. An over-pierced one carrying a birthday pot of creme, and the other two hovering like moths around the flame. Desserts in restaurants have turned sophisticated, but burning candles still smell comfortably familiar. I took a deep breath and practically calmed down. Wherever my eyes traveled, though, patrons avoided my gaze. I was able to hear you again, to see you. Your birthday is March 11. I put it aside for a while. Forgive me. I couldn't go on, had to move forward, couldn't bear the burden of remembering, and couldn't come to terms with the unbearable. Remember Greg's All Saints birthday? He was always St. Catherine of Alexandria, since she and he had the same birthday, November 25. St. Catherine of the Wheel, cheese wheels for the day. His spouse was Jesus Christ, to whom he had consecrated his virginity, his constantly rediscovered virginity. Why did you pick St. Margaret so many times? Did it have to do anything with the dragon, or was it because of Anne Margaret? I can't remember. I have to say, I loved it when Greg's birthday fell on Thanksgiving, and all of us would celebrate with candles and on the saintly turkey. Those were better days. Frosted Tips whispered, I'm sorry, insincerely, since all he wanted was for me to calm down and not embarrass him, and his stablemate added that he tried to watch as many AIDS movies as possible. It's a good thing he didn't tell me he watched Philadelphia. Or I would have stabbed him with his butter knife. Quietly, they talked, sotto voice, hoping that I would follow suit in spite of the sprightly music. Frosted Tips tried to convince me we were on the same side. We're not enemies, he said. We've read your poetry. He reached out to touch me, and I instinctively jerked back, but I was calming down. I could feel the diners turning away as I tried to settle my breath. Inhale, exhale. And then Tom something said that he could understand my upset because he recently watched the movie Rent, which was probably not as good as seeing the Pulitzer Prize and Tony Award-winning musical, emphasis his. Oh, how he wished he could have seen the original cast production on Broadway, and did I by any chance see Angels in America when it first came out? I almost went for the butter knife then, almost. To dab their cherubic faces with room temperature butter, palette knife Bob Ross happy trees on their button noses. It was hopeless though, hopeless. And I realized that even as I showered the ingenues with a fusillade of fuck yous, fuck you, Eve, and all your pretty ingenue friends, fuck you, and fuck your bumpy ride, I was done. My screaming lacked punch, my late fuck yous lacked the early oomph. It was disheartening. I have aged into a text that no longer can be read. indecipherable is me. I was drained and unmoored and vanquished, hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky. I could feel discomfort all about me, gentrified diners staring and pretending not to. When I ranted and fulminated, I jettisoned the social ballast. I'd laid down my mask, and what these people saw was the other. "Please, sir, we have to ask you to leave," the man or manager was saying to me. He was a big boy with a push-broom mustache, and I couldn't see the feature on his face, but the name on his tag was Walter Benjamin. "I am your angel of history," I said, smiling weakly. But then I realized that I'd misread. His first name was Walter, followed by the word bartender. "Please, sir," he repeated, and his arm approached me, but I snapped at him, "Noli mi tangere." You like that, don't you? Walter bartender must have thought me insane, since in this world, a symptom of losing one's mind is a readiness to speak it. I walked out of that den of Kens on my own. I have to tell you that I wasn't able to cry after you died. I'm sorry. I wasn't able to cry for you or any of us. Dry eye at funerals, that was me. I was terrified of following, desperately hung onto the buoy. How could my heart be reconciled to its feast of losses? For years, I thought I was a terrible human being for not being able to shed a tear, a disgusting man. I still think so. Only now I allow myself a justification or two. I was frightened. I had to care for you, for all of us. I had to write everything down. I could not deal with loss irreparable. I had to make sure that we remembered. Well, I forgot the last, didn't I? The weeping willow droops its leaves, but it doesn't weep. It never does. It's a fucking tree. Even with the evening traffic, it was more bearable outside, the city's noise unheard from being always heard. The spring sky was the color of unfiltered indigo. The lit sign advertising the establishment was the color of clotted blood. I knew not where to turn, which way was home, or why I was in the restaurant. What place was this? I heard my name, my butchered name, of course. My country still refused to learn my name. Frosted tips held the door and jabbered cicada-like and had the look of a bird with a broken wing, and I held my arm up for him to be quiet and walked away. All I could decipher was he longed for who knows what, wanted help with words of some kind, begging to understand, and I wanted to go home. Get me gone, get me to a nunnery. I crossed the street, walked much faster than I normally would, one foot before the other, not noticing anything around me. Yet of course I did, since it was your night, wasn't it? There, next to me, was our bookstore, though now it was another aggressively trendy clothing store with T-shirts celebrating diversity and selling for a minimum of $100. I'm not proud, I never was, and it didn't get better not for me. I searched my pockets, and the only pen I was carrying was a brown Sharpie, which would work just fine. On the shop window, on the glass, I wrote, "This is where I met you. Come night, environ me with darkness whilst I rise." Sorry, John Locke is not that easy. "Come night, environ me with darkness while I write, shadow that hell unto me." 2 stores up, on the glass of what used to be the burrito place, I wrote, "This is where you first kissed me." I stopped writing for a while after you died. My inkpot dried, not just my tears. When Jim died 2 months after you, I thought metaphors would never again leave my lips. I'd never rhyme, never sing. The prosaic displacing the allegorical. I was wrong. I did write. Time passed and I forgot. I wrote because I had nothing else to do in the world. I wrote, my voice as out of tune as I was. I wrote one bad poem every few months, full of splendid adjectives, simply splendid, Mr. Poet, splendid, regurgitating plump, meaty words, sharp verbs, action verbs, not passive. I wrote poems, all of them shit on shit, award-winning diarrhea, not a single grain of truth in the entire slop. I knew they were shit, but I kept on, and I was lauded and loved for it. Fucking hate myself. On a store window around the corner, I wrote, "This is where we bought identical pair of jeans." Above a building's lineup of mailboxes, I wrote, "Chris lived here. Used to be the best St. Agatha with vanilla-frosted birthday cake pressed on a tray. the nipples were marzipan. In the entryway to the building next to Chris, I wrote, I sucked a guy's dick in here, didn't even take my clothes off, in an apartment with swag velvet drapes and damask wallpaper, if you can believe that. I wrote notes, jotted identifiers along my walk home. This is where Jim worked. This is where Lou was baton beaten during the bad cop no donut demonstrations. This alley is where Jim was introduced to water sports. See, I can't even say the word. This alley is where Jim was introduced to water sports. This is where we used to buy ice creams. I walked past self-confident plum blossoms preying on branches, past discarded fronds of palm trees, past piss-scented flower pots and newly painted benches stippled with newer grime. This is where a yellow jacket stung me. This place under the stairs with its intoxicating smell of must and wilt and blight is where a stranger fucked me. You looked inhuman when you were dying. Your eyes glistened like dimming stars. You were wasting away and life was leaving you piecemeal. Your soul no longer fit your body. You hated it and I hated it and I couldn't recognize you and I couldn't see you and I was so frightened and I never knew what to do. I looked for the man I love in you and I searched for who I used to be around you and I couldn't find either. I was hurled headlong flaming from the ethereal sky. I reached for your one strong and supple face at the end, and you whispered, "Noli mi tangere." On the door to my home, I wrote, "This is where I loved you. This is where I once composed my good poems. This is where I betrayed you. Shadow that held unto me, and I went in." Thank you.
والله يعافيكي ما كنتش عم بعرف اقرا.
Thank you so much. This event is being live streamed, and I just want to shout out to our friends at MEME, which is the organization of lesbians and of queer women and trans people in Beirut, Lebanon. So we know that you're watching. Nice to see you. Our next speaker is one of the most visionary and effective grassroots political leaders in the world. Now, the question is, what does it take to be a leader? I would say a leader is the person who does the work, and she does the work. A leader has to have big picture. She has big picture. A leader has to see everyone as an individual. She sees everyone as an individual. As a result of all of these talents and insights, she's become as the founding director of Al-Kaus, which for sexual and gender diversity in Palestinian society. She has been able to create perhaps the only Palestinian organization that exists on both sides of the wall of separation, which we know exists in our minds as well as on the earth. And she's been able to transcend that in her political organizing. So please welcome Haneen Maikey.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah. I think this is the first time I will try to read what I wanted to say. Usually I talk, so you will have to deal with less jokes during the speech. I wanted first to thank the Center for Lesbian and Gay Studies and Sarah Shulman and everyone who was part of this amazing conference, and for inviting me to share my experience and my reflections on this very young movement. And the anti-pinkwashing organizing specifically in the fight against Israeli occupation, apartheid, and colonialism. Let me start by noting that nearly 2 years have passed since this conversation started and the launch basically of the anti-pinkwashing campaigns. Since then, we have seen pro-Israeli organizations counterattack with much anticipated anti-Semitism and racist allegations. We have also witnessed organized efforts against Israeli pinkwashing from the lens of anti-war, anti-racist. And we have also taken notice that many LGBTQ activists and groups have integrated anti-pinkwashing within the framework of international gay solidarity work. Within these 2 years, articles, lectures, workshops, as well as local and international campaigns, videos, endless statements, do you remember endless statements? Delegations and more have been organized in an attempt to break open and promote conversations around pinkwashing. Aside from Al-Qaws for sexual and gender diversity, my organization and Palestinian Queers for boycott, sanctions, and divestment, another political grassroots group promoting BDS within queer communities and in Palestine, both groups based in Palestine and a small network of Arab activists, mainly working through Pinkwashing Israel project. Most of these initiatives have began actually within the global north. From PQBDS passing through the various queers against Israeli apartheid groups in the United States and Canada, though the Canadian group was started a bit before this period. And in addition to initiatives based in Europe, mainly informal, mainly based on Facebook. I forgot where I was. The pinkwashing informal initiative based in Europe, queer and LGBT anti-pinkwashing and anti-apartheid collectives have grown rapidly to respond to growing pinkwashing campaigns. Conferences featuring Israel, film festivals, spotlights, and cultural events sponsored by the Israeli consulate, gay prides hijacked by Israeli gay tourism campaigns and delegations, bans, and more. Some of these groups have so far issued statements and led successful campaigns against Israeli pinkwashing. Also, absurd events have added some tension to the scene, making a lot of headlines, from the ban of the New York Gay and Lesbian Community Center on Palestine Solidarity Groups, a ban that did not pass quietly, to the widespread New York Times article and the whole work around it. And even the porn industry didn't stay indifferent. From all of these experiences and more, anti-pinkwashing organizing has suddenly, and within such a short time frame, became a striking and tense embodiment of all the questions that could emerge, or rather erupt, from the intersection of sexualized, gendered, and racialized politics within a modern gay transnational solidarity movement. I want to suggest that the combination of queer, Palestine, and solidarity, three heavily loaded terms that are inherent to anti-pinkwashing effort, are essential in understanding the construction of this movement. It's important, its initial work modes and directions, and the paradigm that it has come to signify. I want to tackle this question from the very specific position and location of someone who's actually living this intersection, as a Palestinian and as a queer activist, and as someone who, from the beginning, has been involved in this transnational movement. While keeping this combination in the back of our heads as a frame of this conversation, I would like to take a moment and explore a few essential questions through which we can hopefully confront the movements, points of tension and move forward. In light of emerging politics of solidarity and our inherently different relationship to it, would it be truthful for us to assume that everyone in this movement, inside this room and outside this room, has, in this movement, came here for the same reasons? And are we fighting for the same cause? Also, I want to push further and ask how shifting the attention from our own experiences as LGBTQs, our desires, fears, tendencies, and motivations would influence the depth and impact of anti-pinkwashing activism, both on the individual and collective levels. Does gayness charge our activism, and if yes, toward what? I want to suggest that a closer look at this package of feelings, behaviors, and identities that are related to being LGBTQ and to organizing as an LGBTQ groups had and has a tremendous impact on how we relate to this struggle and to those at the center of this struggle. This is, in my opinion, a limiting perspective and on anti-pinkwashing activism. And for me, the more interesting question now is how can we transform this starting point, or shall we say, mode of familiar actions and references into something new? I want to continue by talking about these three parts of the combination I suggested as the frame of this conversation, and I will start from the queer part, continuing what I just raised as a question. And as of recently, and very likely with anti-pinkwashing activism, Palestine solidarity movement have begun to act with and shape the production of neoliberal understanding of sexualized, gendered, and racialized collectivities within social movements, and especially within LGBT and queer activism. Again and again, we have seen that attempts to frame the anti-pinkwashing fight through a familiar mainstream Western LGBT lens does not work. And to make sexual orientations and gender identities the driving forces through which we interact and relate to anti-pinkwashing efforts certainly takes away the focus from the central issue, that of course is Palestine. One example would be with the LGBT delegation to Palestine that Al-Qaws and PQBDS hosted in January 2012, almost a year and a few months. The tension between the goal of the delegation, which was to learn about Palestine and explore ways to be in solidarity with the Palestinian people and struggle, and the desire of participants as LGBTQs to know more about sexuality and queers in Palestine was very visible. The tension actually shaped many of the delegations' conversations around these experiences and future involvement around solidarity with Palestine. Some participants found it difficult to have to undertone sexual privileges, such as the visibility of their sexual orientation, relationship, and LGBT lives in general, within the limited space of their visit and social interactions in Palestine. Reframing the discussion away from expression of sexual and gender privileges to the more urgent regulation of Palestinian lives under occupation and apartheid proved to be a challenge throughout the delegation visits. In almost every other LGBTQ conversation during conferences, workshops, when hosting LGBT and other delegations, when making the mistake of speaking to the media, it becomes certainly difficult to include to undertone the I, and including my gay fears, feelings, and how I am used to seeing my life and my politics as a crucial step to understanding solidarity. Deconstructing this familiar mode of activism that relies on our gay tendencies, experiences, and politics is a crucial step in the process of resisting the very central notion of pinkwashing, which is Israel is a gay haven, so it accepts me, and Palestine is homophobic, meaning it rejects me. These steps are part of the process of challenging our binary understanding of sexuality and solidarity. This is related to the initial commitment of breaking down other dominant notions like homophobia, closet, coming out, pride, and visibility, and to connect more to different meanings and notions created outside the global north about sexuality. Part of our responsibility is, in fact, to dismantle such binaries and power relations and reflect upon privileges all of us bring into any solidarity work. The tension between LGBT solidarity with Palestine and the focus on queer experiences in Palestine, or with Palestinian queer lives in particular, for example, is evident. This leads me to ask here, are you in solidarity with Palestine or with the queers in Palestine? Not resolving this tension would be an unfortunate step that would narrow the Palestinian liberation struggle and its multiple layers and complexities to the comfort zone of local LGBT organizing. While the LGBT solidarity frame may be a natural and familiar first step of exploring a new conversation and analysis and finding the ways to express solidarity, this indeed should not be the general or the only mode that defines our work. It would be in the wrong direction if we promoted anti-pinkwashing activism as a new salvation of the somehow boring LGBT organizing. Rather, the question is how we as LGBTQs and anyone else basically are responsible in resisting Israel's Zionist project and its horrific manifestations from ethnic cleansing and occupation to apartheid and colonialism. Moving from the queer aspect to the Palestinian one, I wanted to talk about how we are repositioning Palestine at the center of the movement. Anti-pinkwashing activism did not emerge with a vacuum. It is at the intersection between the LGBT movement and the Palestinian solidarity movement. Before that, these two movements have rarely been perceived as ones that could connect or interact. Furthermore, and as a result of this binary understanding, pinkwashing has been framed as a new form of organizing or tactic aimed to reform both movements. A bit of solidarity to the LGBTQ movement and a little gayness to the Palestinian solidarity work. And the question that emerged from this dynamic is the task of anti-pinkwashing organizing then to politicize LGBT movements, or is it an attempt to queer up Palestinian solidarity movement? Can anti-pinkwashing expand beyond these limitations and become a radical and not a reform strategy? I believe it's about time for a paradigm shift in how we all understand and lead efforts against Israeli pinkwashing. Instead of building reactionary movement whose sole task is to respond and disrupt Israel's use of gay culture and right, we must invest in building proactive, long-term strategies under the unified vision, decolonization, and liberation. All of our efforts must contribute to the Palestine liberation struggle and the dismantling of Zionism as a racist colonial project and a machine of Western imperialism. Our task is to now embed our analysis of pinkwashing within the larger analysis of Israeli colonialism, to frame our efforts within the broader frameworks of homonationalism, cultural imperialism, and settler colonialism. And to do so without undermining anti-pinkwashing and anti-apartheid, anti-occupation organizing in the name of theory. Instead, to utilize such frameworks to create more openings in this thicket and build links with other struggles. We cannot nurture this movement and move forward without historically informed and honest critiques of this movement. Palestine is not a pin on your backpack. Anti-pinkwashing is not another stamp of cool stuff we do besides our daily work and life. Anti-pinkwashing and Palestine solidarity are not markers that we are doing things right and feeling good about ourselves. And pinkwashing is not an isolated policy from the larger colonial Zionist project. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that we cannot fight pinkwashing without framing it as a struggle against Zionism and its different manifestations. This very basic assumption that the real cause fueling this movement is in itself an explosion of divisive questions and unresolved issues that we all are experiencing at the moment and throughout the past 3 years. To be honest, we have hardly even touched these issues in constructive ways that contribute directly to the growth of our work. We must also bear in mind that these questions, the connections we make, and the struggles we are all passionately advocate for are real issues affecting the daily life and choices of some of us. When raising and dealing with these tensions, we need to be aware that Palestine as a struggle is still the most divisive issue in this movement, or at least to those who we want to reach out to. One of the most risky positions in the trap of using the Zionist machine logic, and one of the most risky positions in this activism and ongoing work is to use the Zionist machine logic and tactic, starting from the very real fear of being labeled anti-Semitic, often a paralyzing action in the fight against Zionism that shifts our work motivation from passion to fear. In addition, while reflecting upon the limitation of anti-pinkwashing organizing, we must also be very careful not to preserve the Zionist claim against the isolation of Israel as a racist colonial power by setting doubt on the validity of the Palestinian struggle through the question of exceptionalism. Instead, as a transnational movement, we must use our knowledge and experiences in resisting different neoliberal policies to develop our politics around Palestine, to collectively work toward ending Zionism and Israeli colonial power without forgetting all of our other complicities. An additional unresolved question is a question about leadership, domination, and visibility and invisibility. I have been hearing a lot of questions during the last 2 days. I arrived to New York on last Friday. A lot of questions about who's leading this movement and to whom, as a group, I am accountable. And what voices are dominating the current discourse and activism, and who is invisible and we are leaving outside the conversation. To answer these tough questions, we cannot but begin to question the reproduction of familiar power relations in the movement and the limitation of identity-based groups, even those that are Palestinian-led, but especially Jewish-based groups or Jewish activists They're doing amazing work, but they're mainly now dominating the current discourse and activism of pinkwashing and BDS in general, if we can assume that. This current dynamic that positions some voices as well at the same time to open more opportunities to make space for those who are less involved meanwhile. I will be more specifically talking about Palestinian groups. While I do believe that we as Palestinians, I don't represent Palestinians, but I will use this for because it's easier. We as Palestinians must lead this movement, but on the other hand, I refuse for this to be the only symbolic, and rather envision leadership as a relentless collective effort and always centering those most oppressed in our work. Ultimately, this is an attempt to reposition Palestine at the heart of this conversation. When moving to the solidarity part, like my question is, how can we continue from here? I believe none of us consciously want to step into these traps and become part of a token movement. I'm aware that this process demands long-term commitment and involvement, as well as a balance between our local work and compromises that emerge when organizing within a transnational movement. This effort also relies on the desire and capacities of those involved to lead and develop strategies fit for their own communities and context, while maintaining an awareness of what those we are all in solidarity with actually think and want. I would like to end this talk with 3 directions that would be helpful to consider in the next phase of this movement, 3 directions that I am already part of making them happen. The first tackles the need to theorize our efforts in concrete ways that would emphasize the core values of this movement and situate its analysis within the broader context of colonialism in Palestine. The second direction leads to our movement building effort, including the need to create new alternative spaces that contribute to the ongoing task of building an international network of anti-pinkwashing organizing. And lastly, I will conclude with ways to reframe the struggle from local LGBT anti-pinkwashing work to broader effort toward decolonization. Theorizing our efforts. Informed by such diverse experiences, context, and ideological frameworks, the intersectional nature of this movement is both challenging and enriching. On one hand, our organizing could eventually, and as it is happening now, generate different subcommunities and movements inside movements, each working within their comfort zone under a common anti-pinkwashing umbrella. On the other hand, this movement, as we have seen so far, has the potential to engage with those very same issues that threaten this sense of cohesion and unity. And this is the real challenge now, to tackle such divisive issues while ensuring that the movement can still contain and grow through such transforming discussions. A crucial step is for us to reflect on our own experiences and those of others, especially ones that in one way or another have shaped our intimate and political contributions to this movement. And from this place, to invest in conversation that can bring historically informed understanding that would slowly and gently push this movement's boundaries. From this process, we can begin the very important project of theorizing our experiences with organizing actually against pinkwashing. Some of us, also sitting in this room, amazing activists, have been involved in building a collective working document that particularly engages with such tensions within the movement. The purpose of this exercise is not to find common ground or build yet more comfort zones, but to challenge superficial understandings of solidarity and movement building, and to draw our values from the heart of our differences. And I really can't wait to share this new draft soon with all of you. While continuing this exercise and meeting, of course, a lot of challenges and ongoing work, we have been also investing in the last few months in shifting the conversation, or our, let's say, the major part of our capacity and time into a movement building process. As we began to feel the urgency of initiating direct conversation with anti-pinkwashing activists and groups around the world, we set out to bring activists who are already involved in local work to a collective coordinated effort to both share experiences and learned lessons from their local work and to build transnational strategies to tackle pinkwashing. We understood that there is also a gap between field experiences expressed by activists, including its multiple challenges, and the global intellectual academic conversation that emerging in academic spaces. While critiques from these contributions are accurate in describing some of the different limitations and issues in the movement discourse, they fail to connect these issues with the initial stage of this movement, a stage that produced movement inside movements and introduced various approaches and discourses on pinkwashing and Palestine. It is basically a stage that had not yet generated a defined direction and vision for future steps. The World Social Forum Free Palestine was the perfect platform to tackle pinkwashing and sexual politics in the context of Palestine by bringing together 17 anti-pinkwashing activists. Indeed, an international committee of activists organized the first queer visions at the World Social Forum Free Palestine, met in December 2012. Queer Vision was attended by 17 activists and opened a space for different anti-pinkwashing activists to come together, reflect on their strategies and discourse, and start defining the movement's future directions. Queer Vision in its praxis is an attempt to unpack the power relations inherent to solidarity and the particular solidarity in anti-pinkwashing activism, and to redefine it as a meaningful and powerful interaction between those who are not yet was part of the community. This type of solidarity shifts the power from the familiar white, non-white solidarity to one between queers, trans, Palestinians, Arabs, people of color, and other marginalized and colonized groups. It is a way to re-explore different forms of South-to-South solidarity, even within settler colonial dominant contexts such as the US. The last thing I wanted to discuss, which is a very personal journey for me, it's how we can actually taking the colonial logic inherent to pinkwashing and make it and use the potential of decolonization of this movement. As I said, the last point reflects my own personal journey, but also that of Al-Qaws as a group of activists and a leading movement that chooses to challenge sexual politics and its hierarchies by resisting the interconnected hegemonies of patriarchy in Palestine, Western LGBT notions and strategies, in intersection with resistant Israeli colonialism. The anti-pinkwashing movement is a continuation of this journey's decolonizing efforts. I believe that with anti-pinkwashing, we do not have the luxury to doubt whether or not we should frame the movement as such. We can all see how gender and sexuality are utilized as the ultimate measures of modernity to infuse colonialism, and how we as LGBTQs have been instruments in this process. Pinkwashing is derived from racist and dehumanizing intentions built upon historically specific colonial logic approaches of Israeli Jewish supremacy. Exposing this logic and emphasizing other abuses of sexuality in the serve of Zionism is essential in the broader project of decolonizing ourselves as Palestinians and others. This understanding is also a primary condition to my own involvement in this movement, as both Palestinian and as queer. The guiding force of my own activism is the conscious and uncompromising position of practicing decolonization efforts when possible, and despite the inherent contradictions as someone who lives within and under the direct control of the colonizing power, which is reflected in various. One of the main points in this long process is the intended disconnection from your colonizer, which is reflected in various decisions and actions through the history of the Palestinian queer movement. These actions and decisions including the historical decision to separate from Jewish Israeli groups, the rejection to connect with LGBT groups on the basis of sexual orientation, who don't have a stand against Zionism and their complicity with Zionism, and the refusal to be co-opted in reformist actions led by Israeli progressive groups like projects like Radical Gay Pride, as the Palestinian Queer Project is neither to reform Israel nor Pride, nor LGBT groups. Unfortunately, this clear position, which I personally was articulating it through articles, conferences, is often objected by allies and pinkwashing activists, discourse and actions through their persistent attempt to bring the question of Israel, Israeli civil society, Israeli radical groups, and Israeli LGBTs as part of the conversation. Shifting the conversation from the Israeli colonization to a one about we don't want to alienate the good Israelis, or a good Israeli friend of mine has a great politics, is an undermining action to our effort. This imposes yet again the myth of coexistence and dialogue, and the need to balance with the other side, diverting the question from Israeli complicity to their supposedly good intentions and gayness. These actions and conversations are a direct act of anti-solidarity that harm the essence and praxis of the Palestinian queer movement, that consciously separates its work, vision, and future from its colonizer. Anti-pinkwashing, in my view, should be based on a commitment to challenge and bring an end to the Israeli Jewish supremacy, the refusal to accept the imposed Israeli gay rights experience as a standard Palestinians and Palestinian queer activists need to strive for, needs to be reflected in our anti-pinkwashing work. We all need, including Israeli activists, to challenge the need of different allies to position Israelis as partners instead of possible allies. Decolonization starts from not accepting the obvious assumption of there are good and bad Israelis and good and bad Palestinians. It's based on the assumption and the real reality of there is a colonizer and there is a colonized people. This diverts the conversation from everyone's complicity with occupation and colonialism. This movement must be a diverse one that combines different perspectives, identities, and experiences, but not on the account of harming the Palestinian queer struggle and its essence, ideological frameworks, and core values. This movement is not a space where we reproduce the same power relations we face outside in general, and for sure not the power relation inherent to colonizer and colonized. And if I can conclude, the above crucial processes cannot lead us to decolonizing our bodies and minds without deep and conscious commitment to resist sexual and racial hegemonies, to break down binaries and identities, and most important, to explore new possibilities in our work that are based in understanding of the differences, complexities, contradictions, and nuances of the sexual politics that engulf us, decolonizing Palestine. Thank you.
يعطيك العافية.
So thank you to Rabih and Haneen for your honesty and your fierceness and giving us a lot to think about and grapple with. It's a really meaningful and valuable way to start the conference. Thank you both so much. And we'll see you again at 3 and then at the party tonight. Thank you.
Very.